Welcome to the Genuinely You podcast channel, which is packed with advice and tips on how to live your life with purpose. Do you wish you felt happy and fulfilled? Are you feeling stuck, wishing things could be better? Are you ready to take some action and create the life you want? To start living an empowered life, you need to recognize and make full use of the power and freedom that comes from being genuinely you. Your host is Gina Gardner, a #1 best-selling author whose whole life has been about supporting people to achieve personal empowerment, helping people just like you recognize that they can.
Hi there, it's Gina Gardner here. I'm very pleased to be on Passionate World Radio. I'm the author of Thriving Not Surviving, The 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment, and I'm very pleased to say that it's become an international bestseller. I'm also the founder of the Thrive Together Tribe and the Thriving Not Surviving program. And I'm joined today by my good friend Rachel Davidson, who's a spiritual fiction author, and she's written The Point of Me, which is also an international bestseller. Today we're going to be talking about professional confidence and how you develop it, and our view of what the elements contain. And it's not a definitive list, but it does, I think, contain a lot of the really important parts around professional confidence. I've spent most of my working life helping develop leadership within a whole range of contexts. And it's interesting as you watch people develop how confidence, which is very low to start with, or perhaps overconfident, where people think they know everything and fledge and make mistakes, develops over time into a real sense of this is what you do, and I feel very able to actually put these things into place.
Yes.
And yet there are people who professionally spend their life avoiding doing things that they don't feel confident about.
Yes.
And if they're in a position of being a manager or a leader, how that can really have an impact not only on them, but also on the people they work with. So having professional confidence, there are so many different elements to it, aren't there?
Yes. I think from when I used to work in corporate companies, I know that when I felt at my most professionally confident was when I had knowledge about the actual job I was in and the skills I needed and so on and so forth. But more important than that was when I felt I was actually achieving stuff. So that used to give me a great deal of confidence around making things better. And that was really about understanding what I was there to do, above and beyond just the job description, let's say, but what I was there to do and really why I wanted to do it. That was the real energy behind and the driving, and that confidence of knowing why was what would enable me to actually go and sort of talk to people and get projects started, do business cases and win budgets from my managing directors and so on and so forth.
I think that's really very important. I think before we start to explore that, I think I want to make the distinction between people who are team members and people who are team leaders.
Yes.
And professional confidence is as important for both.
Oh, yes.
But I think that when you are a team player and you don't actually find yourself having to lead other people, the most important thing is you have to lead yourself.
Oh, yes.
You have to manage your own emotional state first, and you have to manage your own confidence.
Yes.
And recognising that even if you feel that you are the least experienced within a group, you still have a point of view, you've still got a perspective.
Oh, yes.
And often that perspective can be something which sits outside the box, and even if the idea in itself doesn't get picked up, it will often spark other ideas from other people.
Yes.
And I would say, whatever your position in whichever organisation that you may be in, and this is actually true of a family as well as a professional setting, recognise that your opinion counts, that your ideas are important. And even if they feel a bit off the wall and those ideas in themselves are not picked up, actually they're valuable because they will spark other people.
Well, you should take confidence from the fact that you were employed in the first place.
Yes.
And that means that there's something about you that is of value to this organisation, whatever it is. So even if you're at the very, very, very junior level, there is still something that that they saw in you, that they want to use, that they want you to actually go and do.
Yes.
So have confidence to know that you have the ability to learn and to develop and to absorb all of that, but actually also to give back.
Yes.
It's never a one-way street.
Absolutely. And I think it's back to this old thing that we've talked about a number of times before, that, confidence is one of those things that, if it's unfamiliar, it's going to feel a bit strange, but push through that.
I can remember,
give it a go.
When starting my new job and coming out of education system and into job felt very different. Education system is, generally speaking, and if I do a big generalisation for the sake of brevity, about pinning your ears back and listening. And the world of work is about pinning your ears back, listening, and then doing and figuring out and solving the problem. So I had a couple of managers who used some very good phrases for me when I was very young, around things like I don't want to take the monkey from around your neck, Rachel, which was basically a message of, if you see a problem, don't come to me, your manager, and complain about it. Come to me with the problem identified and have some solutions in place.
Yes.
And it's a very subtle sort of change, really, but it's a very important one for developing confidence around the fact that your ideas can work.
Yes. I would say that, the being a problem solver and not a problem dumper is a really good habit to create.
Yeah.
Incidentally, if people are just entering the world of work or have children who are about to, then my book, Kickstart Your Career, has lots and lots of help in there to help you become the grown-up professional very quickly.
Yeah.
And, if you are beginning your career, then recognise that you're not expected to know everything. In my experience, people fall into two stools. Those who are very unconfident, and they tend to be the bigger group. And I would say, if you're part of those, then ask, but don't be needy.
Yes.
It's important to listen and not keep asking the same old, because you're not taking responsibility for what you do.
Yes.
But I found about 5% were cocky. They were too confident.
Yes.
And if you're somebody who is supremely confident, then be very careful that you don't upset more experienced members of staff by assuming that you know it all. You still have things to learn. Even on your last day, you've still got things to learn. But also, what's really important for both groups is take responsibility.
Yes.
If you make a mistake, hands up very quickly so the mistake can actually be sorted out quickly.
Yes.
And, particularly if you're in an organisation which has a culture of development rather than blame, there'll be an expectation that you're going to have times when you don't know what you're doing. And that's okay.
I think your use of the word assume, it just triggered another memory for me, because I think when you're young and overconfident, and you have that sort of I know everything and I'm young enough to know everything type of attitude, you do assume a lot of things. And I had another manager say to me about something that I clearly had made a massive assumption on. Well, when you assume, you make an ass of you and me, breaking down the spelling.
Oh, I love it.
Assume, ass, you, me. And I thought at the time, oh, what? I can distinctly remember my youthful sort of, oh yes, whatever. But actually, it really stayed with me. And I find myself using that phrase to my children when they've made assumptions about things. And I say, well, you know what assume does? It makes an ass of you and me.
Well, that's a really good point to remember.
They roll their eyeballs at me too.
I'm sure they do. So let's now talk about people who are either aspiring managers and leaders or who are existing managers and leaders. And your point that, understanding the why of what's going on, I think is absolutely critical. But people need to have a real sense of what they're trying to achieve, their vision.
Yes.
And, in a sense, that comes first. How will you know that you've been successful? What are you aiming for? I would say is step number one, because you can't create a why without a what. So knowing what it is you want to achieve, step number one. But absolutely, why is that important?
Mm.
And does everybody have an understanding of what the vision is and why it's important? Because only then can they have ownership and feel that they have a part to play in terms of the success.
Yes.
But also out of that, the sharing that sense of why is a huge motivator.
I think I heard it recently that somebody described that the why behind what you're doing is what gives it the energy.
Yes.
Gives it the momentum, and people will say things like, "Oh, I get it," and when you get that sort of drop of understanding within another person, that's when your your what can begin to happen.
Yes.
Because you can't. It's very rare that you can go and do something in your life that is entirely on your own and in a vacuum. You will always need other people to come with you, to help you, to assist.
Yes. I think, long gone are the days when people would say, do it because I said so.
Oh, yes.
There are very few occasions when that's appropriate. For example, in an emergency, get out of the building now. But even then, get out of the building now because it's not safe. The why becomes much more relevant, doesn't it?
Yes.
But for most managers, for most leaders, getting people to find themselves underneath the why and helping to deliver that why, projects have got a much better chance of being sustained over time.
Yeah, there's a great guy called Simon Sinek who is a Brit, but he's living in America, and he's done a lot. He wrote a book on the power of why. I don't know if that's the title, but if you put Simon Sinek and why into any search engine, I'm sure you'll find it. And he makes a very valid point that apart from sort of the general feeling of getting it and whatever, it's actually quite a biological process that goes on within us, because our major decisions in life are made at a lower level of brain processing, a more sort of an animalistic, instinctive level.
Yes.
He refers to the limbic brain. And then we do a lot of justification in the cortex part of the brain, which is linked to language and so on, to sort of explain the why. But ultimately, the actual decision to buy in, to purchase literally a product in his examples, is done at a very, very instinctive level. And that's because we feel connection with values behind the whys.
Yes.
And that's why some brands are really, really successful in the world, because they have a very clear why and people get it. And they get it at that sort of gut
deep
level.
Gut level, yes, absolutely. We've already talked about people being responsible for their actions and having the confidence to own what they do, what they say, how they do and say it, and actually when they choose not to do or say something. And there are times when doing nothing is the appropriate thing to do. But I think, having the confidence to own your stuff is really important, because when you don't, you're in victim mode. And as soon as you're in victim mode, you're handing your power over to somebody else.
Yes. And working for people, leaders, in any sort of hierarchy, but working for people that aren't confident about their abilities and why they're doing things and what they're going to do to achieve that, can feel very uncomfortable. I think of people who are professionally competent as people who are able to be generous with their knowledge and working for the greater good. And I've worked for a number of leaders over my time who have been the complete opposite of that, and have damaged my confidence because of it, because they don't feel comfortable in their skin. They have an imposter syndrome type of thing going on.
I call it the best boy or girl in the class, I suppose, from my school days, where people, it's only a good idea if it's theirs.
Yes.
Or they steal other people's ideas or contributions and make out that it's theirs, which I think, lacks huge integrity. It does nothing actually for them, and it certainly damages the relationship. And I think the best managers and leaders are those who are good at getting the best out of their people. Stephen Covey, very well known in terms of management, talks about the servant leader and doing everything that's required to get the best out of people rather than I'm the best boy or girl in the class because I'm the leader. Having that role where your job is to facilitate and to grow and nurture and to hold people to account, of course, and we'll be talking about that later. But ultimately, you know, the best teams are those where everybody's contribution is valued and attributed to the person who has given it. And that takes confidence, I think, to acknowledge your idea is actually more appropriate than mine. But that doesn't diminish me. So I think that's really important.
And there can be some organisational cultures where, you know, that's very hard to be that kind of giving, confident person. That in being so powerful, you are quite a threat. And there are many organisations that even though they talk a good talk about valuing their people, actually don't really encourage a sort of a giving, confident, let's hear everybody's point of view.
You've got to give people permission. And I think that needs to be done explicitly. I'm not talking about saying, Rachel, I give you permission to give me your ideas, but it's a culture where, you know, particularly if you're developing a culture of development rather than blame, you know, no idea is a silly idea until it's been explored and discounted, and that everybody's contribution is really of value. Because interestingly, if you look at so often the idea that actually gets used in the end has often been triggered by something that in its first iteration felt completely ridiculous. I don't have a pet hate about talking about brainstorms and thought showers, and I've no doubt there's a new word now. But you know, the getting people to say, right, no idea is silly. In the first instance, let's have all of your ideas, however off the wall they are, and then let's look at those and judge whether there's any meat in there that we can take out of it.
Because as a leader, again, of any scale, you have to really work hard at fostering that ambience of trust.
Absolutely.
Because that's what you're basically asking other people to do, is to trust that you won't laugh at them when they come up with something, to trust that they will, that it's a safe thing for them to do, that there'll be no criticism, that, you know, something won't hang around and bite them on the bum. You know, all of these sort of, again, quite animalistic, basic fear things.
I mean, these are core values.
They are.
And if they are in place and everybody shares those core values, then things go incredibly well. But if there's a variance with core values, either way, employee, team member or leader, it leads not only to things falling apart in terms of whether or not you're going to be successful, but leads to huge levels of stress and sickness in the end. Because if your values are being ignored, then that's at a very core level. It's why they're called core values. And it creates great anxiety, unhappiness and stress, which in itself has an impact on well-being.
I used to use a phrase, which it wasn't mine, somebody else gave it to me, called learned helplessness. And
many people exhibit learned helplessness.
Yes, and I have experienced it where I have felt, well, there's not a lot of point in me putting forward that idea, or there's not a lot of point in me doing that. I should probably just keep my head down, because last time I said it
got shot off.
Tall poppy syndrome and all that. And I do think a lot of organisations are effectively the way they are because they help their staff, their people, to be helpless.
I think it might be helpful with the time that we have left to look at some of the elements that go to create confident leaders. So we've talked about the vision, we've talked about having a very strong sense of why. But I think one of the areas, and I work with lots of businesses, and where things often go wrong are the expectations are neither explicit
Right.
nor are they clear and shared.
Mm-hmm.
And they're often not very high.
Right.
So for me, high, shared, explicit expectations start with the advert.
And by high expectations, you mean?
I want excellence. I don't want mediocre, thank you very much.
Yeah.
But you need to have a shared understanding of what does excellence look like, sound like, feel like in the context of this situation.
Yeah.
So you start with your advert. You know, what sort of person are you looking for?
Yeah.
And very often people just put the same old advert out, which has no real relevance in terms of what sort of person.
Yeah.
When I was a head teacher and I appointed teachers, I had the view that I could teach them to be a good teacher. What I couldn't teach them was to be highly motivated, somebody who worked hard, somebody who was keen to learn, and somebody who was a people person.
So skills versus attitude, and a lot of people are employed on the basis of the skills they have.
Absolutely.
And not many are employed for the attitude they have.
Now, it's very different. If you're employing a pilot,
yes,
I want somebody who can fly a plane.
Yes.
If I'm employing a brain surgeon, I want somebody who's going to know what they're doing. So I think there has to be a huge caveat.
Yes.
But even with that, if you are employing somebody with the right attitude, then you are going to get someone who is going to fit your team in a different way. Then the interview. I think, and I teach interviewing skills and I teach people to be interviewed. And I'm just amazed at how often people just listen at surface level.
Yes.
I was once involved in a training session. This is going back right to the beginning of my career. And I was the very youngest. I was very cheeky, I have to say. Everybody was much more experienced than me. And we had actors who were taking the part of the candidate. And it was videoed.
Right.
And what I found is that the people who were glib and who were great body language and who came across as very confident, they got the job. But when we unpicked what they'd answered, actually the answers had no substance.
Yeah.
So I would say if you're interviewing, be clear about what you want and create questions in layers that actually determine whether that person is going to do what you want. But in an interview, I would always set the scene and say, this is a two-way process. This is as much for you to find out if it's right for you.
Yes.
Don't come here if you don't want to work hard, if you don't want to learn, if you're not a good team member. Don't want any moodies. If you're somebody who's got a temper and you can't control it, not the right place for you. So on the first sign of difficulty, I could go back and say, do you remember what I said at the interview? You said no moods. And yet here we are on a Monday morning. I think you might have been out on the lash at the weekend. Keep your moods at home, please. Yes. So I think that those explicit expectations start from the beginning and should be maintained right the way through.
I totally agree. And whenever I was doing interviews, I always held the balance in my head that yes, I had to perform and I had to prove my abilities and my attitudes and my skills, but actually they also had to prove they needed to light my flame.
Yes.
There's a lady on LinkedIn called Liz Ryan. She runs the Human Workplace, and she talks about this exactly, that as somebody applying for a job, you have to remember that they need to earn your work, your time, your effort too. It has to be the right place for you. It's not always the employer who's
And I think it goes back
position.
to core values.
Yes.
They've got to be a firm that you feel that you will feel right in.
Yes.
So the expectations, having high shared expectations, I think goes through in terms of effective delegation. And delegation is done so badly.
Yes.
Because most of the time the people who are delegating haven't got the confidence to set those high expectations right from the start, to share them, to talk about timescales, levels of autonomy, what the budgets are. Their confidence to set it up isn't great, and then they don't monitor it and evaluate performance along the way well enough. and they don't hold people to account.
I can freely admit that I have always been a really bad delegator. And I get all of the control aspects of delegation, and I get the trust aspects of delegation, but I always struggle with doing it. Always.
And
That's
I think,
because I like to be in control.
well, those people who have the "it's better to do it yourself because at least then I know the job's done properly" sort of leadership and management, I think it is about confidence, and it is about making sure that the people that you delegate to have the tools and the skill set in order to do it. And so that's a big training issue. Because they don't know what's going on in your head unless you share that. And there are ways of doing that you can ensure that people know what it is that they're doing by asking the question rather than just telling. Then saying to people, right, can you write me the proposal with what you think are the key issues? Then you can actually see that and then determine whether there's a step missing. But holding people to account and doing it in a way that isn't accusatory, that doesn't push people into a corner, but is about, right, so what's going well? Goes back to this culture of development. The only failure, as far as I'm concerned, is a failure to give it a go and a failure to learn if something goes wrong. So if you keep making that mistake, then that's a real failure. And again, I've got to qualify that. If you're a pilot, I don't want you let loose on flying my plane until somebody's very confident that you know how to do it. Zero tolerance of mistakes. But for the most part, people need to learn, and they need to be given the parameters to learn. So delegate appropriately. If somebody's very inexperienced, delegate a bit of something and let them do that, and then give them the next bit. Don't just let them loose.
And frankly, delegation is a critical skill. I mean, I've just said, I struggle with it and I was always bad. And it always used to stress me. But it's a critical skill. You can't really not do it in life, because you cannot do everything yourself. You literally cannot do everything yourself.
And it's such a waste of a development opportunity for the other person. How are you going to learn unless you are given the opportunity to do it?
I see this in my parenting, actually, that I don't delegate to the children certain key tasks in the house. In old-fashioned terms, chores. And that's because I don't trust them to do it the way I want to do it, and they don't like the control that I try to place on them in order to get them to do it the way. So often in this kind of scenario, it's like, oh, better to do it myself. But I do recognise that actually I'm disabling them by not delegating effectively to them, and I'm making my life harder by not doing it. So I have to push and do it. But every time I come to it, it's like, oh, such hard work.
And it's interesting because I often say to leaders, managers, you are the parent in this. And if you continue to put their shoes on and tie their shoelaces up, you'll still be doing that in a year, 5 years, 10 years. They have got to go through that painful process of learning to tie their shoelaces. And I'm using that as an analogy. I would also say that the holding people to account is something, there's a really common pattern that people ignore something that's going wrong, and they ignore it, and they ignore it because it's too difficult to have that conversation. And then they can't ignore it anymore, and there's a big blow up. And the person who is on the receiving end thinks, what? I've been doing it for 6 months. What's the matter? Whereas if you have regular monitoring and evaluating conversations where you say to that person, so how is it going? How do you know? Where's your criteria? And that's where, let's go back right to the beginning. Having your vision and your criteria for success is so important, because then you have something to hold people to. If it flops about and nobody knows, how will we know when it's going to be successful? Because that's not been defined. Then you can't hold people to account. But what I would say, if you're holding people to account, have the confidence to be able to say, I need to deal with this, but let me get myself together and get my thoughts together. Because you never want to do that when you're feeling angry and frustrated. You need to manage your emotional state first and to talk in a very neutral voice in order to have that productive conversation rather than it become acrimonious and relationships be destroyed.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest compliments I think I was ever given as a head was when a young teacher who we'd had a quite a deep discussion about their performance said, you know, you have a way of telling me that what I've done isn't right, but in a way that I feel good about, and that I know now what I've done that I'll do differently in the future. And I think when you can do that, you're really growing people. And as a leader, having the confidence to say to somebody, look, you know, I'm perhaps not great at holding you to account, but I need to do it not only for the project and for the organisation, but because it's in your best interest too. So let's look at this in detail and let's find a way forward. It's always about finding a better way forward.
Well, you know, when you're an individual in these kinds of organisations and corporate structures and, you know, quarterly review type scenarios that are going on, you know, also have the sense of self to actually initiate those kind of conversations yourself. I've worked for a couple of managers who never like to do like quarterly reviews because you know the appraisal system is like a nightmare in most organisations. But just on an informal basis, I would have in my head, it's been a month since I last had everything going fine, kind of check, and I would force that upon them just in a very, tell me if I'm doing anything that, you know, you're not that pleased about, but tell me if I'm doing something great, and sort of just make it a human conversation outside of the formal HR process. I
think so. It's a two-way process, and both sets of people need to have the confidence to initiate and to see it through. I think we've run out of time, but what I would say, leaving this conversation, is have the confidence to say you're sorry and put things right if things have gone wrong. And if you're the manager and you've actually got it wrong, to go and say to somebody, I'm really sorry, I didn't handle that very well, let's have a look at how we can do it better. And also the confidence to say thank you. Goodwill is such a precious commodity, and thank you goes a long way. But only say it when you mean it. I haven't said thank you this week, I need to say thank you, but a heartfelt thank you. Look somebody in the eye and say thanks goes a long way.
That comes back to having an authentic why.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for joining us. You'll find lots of information. There's loads of free stuff on my website, which is genuinely-you.com. You can also download a free copy of Thriving Not Surviving from the website. That's genuinely-you.com. And Rachel's book, The Point of Me, is available on Amazon. And we look forward to being with you next time. Thanks very much.
You've just been listening to another great Genuinely You podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Genuinely You is a culmination of Gina's work, spanning over 30 years, of helping people learn what makes them feel happy and truly fulfilled, and how to achieve it. Please visit genuinely-you.com today to find out more.